Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Looking Forward. This is the penultimate event of the Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival 2020, hosted by Smashing Times International Centre for Arts and Equality. So Looking Forward is a platform for artists to speak about the work and the projects that they are involved with, that they're developing or they're thinking of developing for the future. It's an opportunity to brainstorm, to discuss and share ideas. And the event highlights the strength and endurance of the arts community and their extraordinary ability to persevere. So my name's Bryony May. I'm chairing this afternoon. I'm in County Fermanagh in Northern Ireland, where I've been for about 25 years on and off. I've been involved with Smashing Times for, I think, more than 10 years now. I have a background working as a consultant with the creative industries and communities, and a background in project and venue management. I'm currently the arts manager for Fermanagh and Omagh District Council, which is geographically the largest local authority in Northern Ireland, but with the smallest population. So lots of rural issues and challenges. I'm going to introduce all of our speakers and then hand you over so you can hear them. We've got 7 fabulous speakers for you this afternoon. We have Antonio de Souza, who's a visual artist, educator, and a member of Art Nomads. We have Lara Pittman, who's a co-founder and curator with Art Nomads. Deirdre Murphy, a musician and playwright. Maureen McGovern, who is the chair of Disability Arts Collective and the coordinator of the initiative Smashing Barriers Drama Collective. Alongside Kate Harris, who's a theatre maker, drama facilitator and activist. Anya O'Hara, who is a theatre maker, and last but not least, Dave Randall, who's a musician and writer. Our artists from Art Nomads will be first talking about a project they are developing called the Migrant Ship Project. Antonio, over to you.
That introduction. I was born in Nairobi in Kenya, in East Africa, and I grew up in London, and my parents are originally from Goa in India. So my work revolves around identity and cultural identities, and today I'm going to be talking with Lara Pittman on the behalf of Art Nomads about the Migrant Ship Project. So we'll come back to that in a moment, and I'll hand over to Lara. Thank you.
My name's Lara Pittman, and I have a fine art and digital media education from the UK and from Ireland. And I now work in a socially engaged practice with mostly women and migrant communities in Dublin. The Invisible Museum and the Perfect Global City are participatory projects which were made in 2019. I'm now working as a curator and administrator with Art Nomads. So, and I'm also going to introduce a bit about Rajinder Singh, who couldn't be here today for personal reasons, but he's really instigated this project, so I wanted to talk very shortly about him. He was born in Ipoh, Malaysia. He now lives in Dublin. His paintings and installations, as well as photography, video and performances, explore ideas around the vulnerable body and its pain, interrogating the economies of power that deny it space and shape. Rajinder graduated with a PhD in engineering in the UK and a master's in fine art from Singapore. He's currently artist in resident at UCD, and he's showing work in Tulka 2020, which isn't really on show exactly yet, but in collaboration with N Direct Provision Group. So we're going to show some images now. Do we see them? Oh, there was, yeah, okay, well, the one before that, which just was the introduction, which is about Art Nomads, is that Art Nomads was formerly called the Migrant Artist Community, and it was established in 2020. And the artists included at the moment are Mohammed Ashur, Antonio de Souza, Kandil Kafil, Hina Khan, Tomash Madajak, Roxana Manshuri, Joe Odibo, Kuasha Rehan, Rajinder Singh, Amna Walayat, and Insaf Yala Sinkaya. So this slide now is the opening of Transhumance, which was the nomadic artist part of this land, which was exhibited in February 2020, and it was crowdfunded and a self-organised exhibition, which happened in FizzFest, the space, which is an empty retail space, organised through Dublin City Council. And the opening event was organised through Welcome Cafe. So I could have the next slide. This is the shop window of the exhibition, which was great. It was, a lot of footfall. It was a piece called Nest, was a sculptural installation by Amna Walayat. So next slide, please. And this is the painter Joe Odibo with his paintings in the exhibition. Oh yeah, great, I can see better now. And next slide, please. This was the celebration at the opening event, and as you can see, a crowded space with artists, friends, families and guests. We had Palestinian food, and the exhibition was opened by artist Jessie Jones and Massi activist Zah. And this is sort of like, I suppose we're speaking at the moment about this idea of what we're doing now in COVID-19 situations. So this is before that happened. So the next slide, please. This is Thought Space, a work by Tomasz that was in the exhibition. And next slide. This is artists Hina Khan and Jessie Jones and Insaf Yalcinkaya and her artwork Shamaran. Next slide, please. This piece called Ireland as Borderland was by Rajinder Singh. He worked with activists Bulanani Mafako, Ronit Lenton, Lucky Kambala, and Donna Vumo. So next slide. Oh, I think one got missed there. Oh, anyway. We went on then to work with Christchurch Cathedral and Counterpoint Arts in the UK to mark World Refugee Week in June 2020. And because of the COVID lockdown, we had to think of new ways of working. So we changed our plans and we worked with projections in the space of the cathedral and videoing a journey through the space as a portal and then shared it online. And this is an image from that exhibition, which was us setting up. And this is Rajinder Singh's work called Fold, and it's a projection of a dance piece within the cathedral. So next slide, please. This work called Head On by Antonio de Souza. And again, this is the sort of work in progress, showing you how we, just thinking about ways of doing new work, really. And next slide, please. This is Slave Ship. It's actually a miniature painting, but projected in the crypt of the cathedral. So it was projected really large. And then actually now I'm going to pass over to Antonio to talk about our proposed project, which is called Migrant Ship.
So can we move the slides on to the beginning of the Migrant Ship project? Thank you. Okay, so this is a collaborative project, which is to build and launch and film a voyage off a one-person river craft on the River Liffey in Dublin. Next slide, please. So the inspiration for this project was inspired by the rescue ship Mare Junio, which began its maiden journey in 2018. It was on a mission to save migrant lives and at the risk in the Mediterranean Sea. Throughout history, the migrant ship has crossed oceans, brought global shifts, altering cities, countries, communities, and ultimately ourselves. The movement of migrants by ship holds a significant place in the Irish psyche. The River Liffey, which drew its first settlers to establish themselves in Dublin, later became a site of mass emigration, where thousands set off to escape poverty, discrimination, and oppression. In these times of COVID, where lockdown and restrictions on travel are affecting everybody's spirits, this project is a symbol and a performance through the heart of Dublin City, aims to reclaim hope and optimism, to celebrate the agency of migrants. If we could go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the building of this boat, which will be housed and launched, will be built in Raja's studio, co-constructed by myself, and the overall project will be coordinated by Laura. Quiva Butterley, an activist in Gaza and in the Mediterranean, will mentor the project. The next slide, please. That's what we're hoping to achieve. And the next slide. So members of the Art Nomads group, which Laura just mentioned, will contribute ideas remotely and in person to sculpt, mark, prepare the boat for launch. The sharing process will include online discussions, including inviting guests to focus on migration stories, the sharing of digital images, audio recording, music, and other intercultural exchanges. If we can move on, please. So the next two slides are just examples of showing an online workshop we intend to run, is the making of miniature boats, which will form a flotilla which are tiny watercrafts as part of the project. Next one, please. And again, so that's just an example of the boats. So the launch will be in Chapel Lizard, which is the launch site, which is Raja's studio. And then the next one. Thank you. The project process and journey will be filmed, documented, and live streamed, and will engage both the use of a body cam and drone-based cameras. The edited film of the project will be screened, shared online, and complemented by a webinar and discussion in collaboration and support with Smashing Times and the Welcome Cafe. And the last one, please. Thank you. And so we're hoping to launch the project to happen during February and March of 2021, and then hoping for the launch in April of that year, and hoping that we will have people viewing it and participating in that project. So I'm just going to hand you back to Laura just to close this off. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, okay, I can't hear myself. I'm not sure if, Kevin, you can show a very short piece of that video. Oh yeah. What we wanted to just challenge everybody in the audience here is to think about how we can make art that engages people and is more embodied experience. And this is just a very short clip of somebody who's canoed from the source of the Liffey down into Dublin City. And it's just that idea of how we make something more physical, more experience, a bit more interesting as we're all making all this work online. So it's just purely putting it out there to everyone today. So hopefully you can feel the water here, get wet. Okay, so as soon as you want, Kevin, you can switch that off. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I look forward to the fruition of the migrant ship project. That sounds absolutely fascinating. Okay, we're going to hear now from Deirdre, who's going to speak about Capitalism the Musical. Her 2019 show, This Was Never Going to Be Normal. How true is that of this year? And the contents of our upcoming EP release. So over to you, Deirdre.
Thanks. I want to start off, talking about capitalism, the musical, and also kind of how it's led me to where I am in my artistic practice today. Back in the day when I wanted to write about capitalism, I knew right away I wanted to make it as like palatable and as sort of mainstream as possible. I didn't want people to like leave with this like heaviness in their bodies, and so I thought musical. And I also knew right away that I wanted to really sincerely subscribe to this thing that Martin Luther King Jr. said that made a really big impression on me, which is he said he wanted to work to create a beloved community. And like these days, we really go for tolerance as like our goal. But being part of a beloved community is actually like what we need for our souls. So that was really important to me from the very beginning, to try to start working in that way. I know, yeah. I had to try to make it funny as well, because, if you're going to deliver the bad news, you got to try to make them laugh, kind of thing. So I drew from the circus community that I was part of. There was a lot of standing acrobatics in the show. So I kind of expressed hierarchy through really simple partner acrobatics, mostly standing on shoulders. And like the emperor class of person in the musical never really touched ground. But we're always kind of like walking on maybe a kind of catwalk made of other human backs. Actually, Kevin, if you want to show just those two images, that'll kind of give a little clarity as to what we're talking about there. There's that one. It's me on the bottom, and then the other one. Yeah, so just to give you kind of a little flavor of what it looked like. So I, of course, was not able to do this process alone. But I had tremendous help from John Lennon right away, who was instrumental, if you will, in the composition of a lot of the music. So he was my co-composer. And also I had really early support from Maria McNeil and Paul Johnson over at Dance Ireland. And something really phenomenal, I think, that came about through the musical was the sense of community that we did develop. Not only through like the performers, the band, the production staff, production crew, but also like our audiences were really tremendously supportive. I remember a friend told me that they were in the audience waiting for the show to begin, and they said to their friend, "This is the 4th time I've seen it." And the person in front of them turned around and was like, "It's the 7th time I've seen it." And that struck me so deeply. It's like such a lovely thing to have people be part of. And the lens I'm kind of most interested in looking back at the musical through right now is the lens of like quality of care, and looking at like assessing what I did and what I could have done better. I'm really influenced right now by my dear friend and colleague Jenny McDonald's work with her Solo Sirens Festival, and like really modeling quality of care in a way that creates a group ethos of kindness that can really bring us forward into the world. People were able to take her work on really deeply, and I hope that they're able to take our work on really deeply as well. We also we were in residency for about 1 year at the Back Loft, and we did a lot of performances in the Back Loft in Dublin. And then we also did a quite memorable performance in Grange Gorman, the Squat. And from that performance came about an invitation to go tour kind of a network of squats in Italy, kind of like a punk circuit, like punk gigs. And so in April of 2017, we took 19 people, including a tour baby, to Italy, and had a really amazing time performing and really learned a lot performing in a couple of squats there. That was very cool. And so that now I'm like in my practice now, I am interested in sort of how I can turn on that quality of care into the different structures of my life, and like how we can turn on that quality of care into the different structures of all of our lives. My intention for the musical is to allow it to help shift our collective consciousness, the consciousness of the world, in a way that radically transforms our society. And a lot of that is through not just the ideas, but like it's through how we interact with each other. Like right now, for example, quality of care around the mother and baby home scandal. Maybe like the most caring thing to do would be to like go occupy the doll. Maybe it would like a socially distanced perspective. Like, how do we care about that incident in a way that can actually make change? I heard like humanity, the whole world, like we're at a crossroads for sure right now. I heard it referred to the other day as like the omni crisis, which is like the intersection of, economics and patriarchy and sexism and classism. And we need to start exploring the ways in which we can dismantle the omni crisis without destroying everything, without tearing everything down. And I think that quality of care really needs to be at the front of that practice. And since that is something that we are actively practicing within our own lives, I think that the arts are kind of well placed to push that vision. Like the arts have got the broad spectrum of like, we can envision a utopia, or like we can sell the message, we can make it irresistible. And then also, we've got the modeling within ourselves that we need to reflect back into the world. So Audre Lorde said that you can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. And I think that she was absolutely right. And we're not trying to dismantle with the master's tools. We're not trying to dismantle with patriarchy, but we're trying to dismantle through the matriarchy, through feminist action. And we're kind of pushing in front of us this wave of action that I would like to see guiding the dismantling and the remantling of our societies. And I hope that Capitalism the Musical can be part of that. In the following way, right now we're looking at recording the soundtrack, which is really exciting. We've got kind of everything in place. All we need to do is get the go-ahead from the restrictions. So as soon as that happens, then ta-da, presto, like lovely people are going to be involved and the recording can get made. And also I'm looking at developing it as a graphic novel. So then it can be released as a graphic novel with the soundtrack. And so those are a couple of ways in which I hope to bring the musical to the world. I'm also looking at, I've got a little bit of revolutionary music under my belt, and I'm trying to, I'm gathering my resources to release an EP on that. And I think on that note, I shall bid you all adieu for the moment.
Thanks, Deirdre. That's great. Lovely to hear all those ideas bubbling away, and I really love the idea of a beloved community. That's a lovely concept. Looking forward next is Kate and Maureen from the Smashing Barriers Verbatim project. Smashing Barriers is a mixed impairment disabled theatre ensemble. Founded in 2016, they use participatory theatre practice in tandem with the social model of disability to create new theatre that shows the lived experiences of disabled people. The Verbatim project is using personal stories and historical documentation to create a script that explores the disability rights movement and the impact this movement has had on the lives of disabled people. So over to you, Kate and Maureen.
Okay. Kate, would I start?
By all means, my dear.
Okay. I'm coming in here very quickly just to say that my name is Maureen McGovern and I'm the chairperson of the Ballyfermot Chapel Lizard Disability Action Collective. And basically we're a human rights organisation, a local organisation. And for a long time we have been thinking about there has to be other ways of expressing the discrimination of that society has put on disabled people, and how can we talk about that among ourselves, among our own peers first? Is there a different way of doing it? And art We found that art is a way of doing it, and art allows us to talk about it, but not directly. It could be later, it could be later on. It would be very direct, but we had to find language ourselves, talking among ourselves, because disabled people were boxed at one stage in society and still are to a certain extent. So, for instance, people with physical disabilities are in one corner, people like with sight impairment are in another, and so forth. And never the twain had met. And we really wanted to examine what that was, first of all, like, and being away from our other peers, and what do we have in common. So we looked at the theatre of oppressed, and we says, oh, this is a way to go. This is one way to go. And we worked with Sarah Fitzgibbon, as she worked with us just to talk about setting up Smashing Barriers. And Smashing Barriers was set up for disabled people, and it's run by disabled people. I think that's really, really important. And then we went around looking for an artist that would be willing to work with us around the social model and disability. And the social model disability was really, really important, because it's not about changing me as a disabled person. It's about changing society. We're the only reason why we are disabled is because of the way our society is constructed. And basically what we wanted to do was to try and unconstruct it, really, in a way, not getting out there with hammers, not yet, but is to realizing together that we have something in common, those like with different impairments. First of all, we had it in common. We had a language now. We could actually demonstrate that through the arts. So then we got Kate. We went looking for Kate. And Kate was really important to bring us to the stage that we're at now. Kate would probably go into the last two plays that we done and bring us up to where we are now. So I'm just going to hand over to Kate now. Thank you very much. There you go, Kate.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Yeah, and thank you, Brian, and all the other artists. It's just such a pleasure to be here and be part of the Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival. It's just wonderful to see community and to hear all the ideas going on. So just for our contribution, so Smashing Barriers has been exploring the kind of lives and experiences of disabled people in this kind of different way. As Maureen said, we're dealing with people with a whole range of different impairments. So we're breaking down the barriers between the impairments as well as between kind of the disabled and non-disabled communities. So and I really appreciate what Deirdre was saying about using humor. I did come in as a non-disabled artist, feeling with my own kind of internal biases and ideas that it must be very hard and difficult, and that didn't go over very well with our actors. They were looking for something that would tell their story, but in a funny way, in a life-affirming way, in a compassionate way that shares their experience as human beings. So it was just it was a huge learning process for me, and quite a joyful one as well. So we worked over the last couple of years to devise a play called Dead or Alive, which we had the great good fortune to show at the end of 2019 in Rua Red and in Access as part of the International Day for People with Disabilities, before everything went online. So that in that play, we were kind of exploring experiences, but setting them in a totally fictional situation that was quite kind of camp and high-spirited. And again, kudos to Deirdre for the sound design and also for the inspiration. I think Capitalism the Musical was something that was great to see when it was out originally, and really inspired me as an artist to use music more freely in the plays as a way of engaging with audiences. So we were meeting after our performances and deciding what we were going to work on next, collectively as Smashing Barriers. And we really wanted to maybe explore our own stories a little bit further. So we worked on a project with Joe Salvatore in NYU in New York. He's the head of the Verbatim Theater Lab there. And we did a process of interviews with each of our actors interviewing someone else and then performing a section of that interview in the verbatim style, which is word for word, breath for breath, and gesture for gesture, which was really, again, really lucky because it was something that after the end of March, we were able to continue through Zoom and online. And we're actually quite supported in the project by the fact that we could do things on Zoom and then record them and edit them all remotely, so that our project was able to continue, and we were able to put together a short film based on the performances from the interviews. So that was quite exciting and a new way of working for us, and really kind of kept us together as a community over the first lockdown period. But we were looking to kind of find a way to share those individual stories in a way that was kind of linked with the greater historical context of the experience of disabled people. So we are partnering with the Independent Living Movement Ireland to access their archives over, I think, 30 years of history on the disability rights and human rights movements in Ireland. So that we're going to bring our own documentary material and their archives. But because we're working collaboratively, we also have our actors are bringing their own vision of the play into this. So we are going to be having those elements combined with another crazy, I think, science fiction version of our world that tells the story of our experiences in this time of coronavirus, but by setting it in the future and then people going back in time and exploring, the history of this time as seen from the future, from the perspective of disabled people. So we'll have our stories and the documentary material and also kind of the history of COVID all somehow wrapped up in this remarkable story that we're in the middle of developing. So yeah, that's what we're working on at the moment, and I think it's really important to have these communities and places where we can share practice, because it's quite difficult when you're used to making theater in such a spatial, temporal, we're in the same room in the same time, doing stuff together, to remove that, to be together but removed in space is has been quite challenging. So I think sharing practice and having the supports of the wider creative community has been really important in kind of keeping us inspired and motivated while we try and find new ways of creating. So yeah, so thanks very much. This has been really great. Maureen, is there anything you want to add to that? I think maybe about if there's anything about the social model of disability and arts practice that you think would be important for other people to know about.
Yeah, just to maybe explain it very quickly what social model means, and we have to compare it to the medical model of disability. So the medical model of disability is blaming it, society is blaming ourselves, like for us as disabled people to change as much as possible, to be as able-bodied as possible, I'd say non-disabled, and the social, and kind of blaming us, and kind of like we're taking up time in society, we have to be ones to be fixed, we have to be ones to be taken care of. Where the social model says, no, it's really important that we have, diversity in the world, and part of that, of that diversity is disabled people, and the only way disabled people can participate fully in whatever life or whatever part of society that they choose is that we need to, the barriers need to be removed, and that's societal barriers. So that's kind of like, it's everything to do with policy, it's to do with legislation, it's to do with ramps, it's to do with buses, it's to do with everything. It's to do with support, so that disabled people have maybe personal assistance to support kind of like me to get out and be part of it, and not necessarily take those. We need supports and resources in order to fully participate. And if we don't have them, well, then we're living in the medical model of disability. And I think it's really, really important that needs to be broken down. And that's why we kind of robbed smashing from yourselves and Smashing Times. I didn't realise it was Smashing Times until, and then we put barriers, because that was really important, because the barriers needs to be smashed, and we'll smash it in every way possible that we can, not violently, but like certainly through the arts and all aspects of the arts, and then other ways by lobbying, by kind of like talking and doing whatever we need to do to break those barriers, by negotiating with the non-disability community so that we can negotiate together. Because remember, everybody will experience disability in their lives at some stage. And so whatever we're fighting for to change is good for everybody in the community.
Yep, absolutely.
Is that
yeah.
that's it really?
No, that's great. But also, I would just say that like we've also been working on adapting, models of theater, to be more inclusive, and we're trying to bring that experience out there as well. Just find different avenues for different communities to have their voices heard in theater. So yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. We're really excited. And I think there's a Facebook page for the Smashing Barriers Drama Collective, and you can see all the video work we've done, both Dead or Alive and the Verbatim Theater Project are all on there. And yeah, go ahead and have a look at that if you want to see us in action.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate and Maureen. That was great to hear those inspiring projects, and fantastic that you managed to continue all of that work through lockdown. So that was great. Next, we're going on to hear from Anya, who's going to speak about her current projects, including The Patient Will See You Now, which is a large-scale solo exhibition focusing on the inadequacies and farcical nature of accessing healthcare in Ireland. The work questions and exposes bureaucracies that oppress those who fall out certain definitions of normal, valuable and productive. Anya is also taking part in the Axis Playground Bursary, which is a residency award for the performing arts with disabilities at Axis in Ballymun. So over to you, Anya.
Hi guys. First of all, I'd just like to say thanks to Maureen. That's amazing to hear about the collective and all the work that you're doing, working with the social model of disability, and creating work about access and how the medical model of disability kind of is such a huge barrier to many disabled people. So I'm an artist with a disability, and I create lots of different types of work. I work as an artist, as a theatre maker. I kind of cross forms, and I collaborate and work with different organisations. So this year I was lucky enough to be selected to be presidency at A4 Sound Studio in Dublin. It was meant to be 6 months, but I'm still there because of coronavirus. So that's one upside to a horrible time. So with them, I started work and research. I was really interested in how medical practitioner becomes a medical, and what are the barriers to keeping, I suppose, how many disabled people are professionals, and what kind of things keep us out of that profession. Working scale installation, it's a huge huge waiting room that I've with a one-on-one performance. Put up the first slide. Great, so that's just the image, the promotional image for it. So I can move on to the next slide then. So I created this sort of see-through waiting room, and I kind of worked with other disabled and chronically ill people in the part of the residency at this group called Chronic Chats, and we worked together kind of every week for 4 weeks. So I created kind of humorous coloring pages that had like a prompt. So each week we would discuss a different topic. Topics was draw your ideal waiting room. So as chronically ill and disabled people, we spend an awful lot of time waiting, especially under the health service in Ireland. Time or something, be that an appointment, a surgery, treatment, or just to be seen. Me myself, I spend an awful lot of time in A&E because my conditions are not very well known, and often that's my only port of call. My GP, so I spend a lot, specifically in A&E, accident and emergency waiting rooms. So as part of this peer support group, we spent 1 week talking about our experiences in waiting rooms, what would make that better, what would make it easier for us, and kind of all the things that work against us. So for myself, things like bright lights, noises, having to sit up for long periods of time make me much, much worse and actually deter me from going to seek the help that I need. So within this installation, I looked at creating this ideal experience, for these kind of waiting rooms, for these kind of interactions. And then I looked at kind of creating sort of a farcical version. And unfortunately, this exhibition hasn't happened yet. And this is a spoiler if you're planning on coming to it in the future. But when you sign up for the exhibition, there's a form, and I ask you if you have any access needs or anything like that. And if you do, you get the ideal experience. And if you don't, you get the the opposite of that. So I can move on to the next slide. Great. So I had 2 sets of chairs made. So the one on the, oh God, I don't know which is left and which is right. Anyway, one of them is built to be completely uneven, the audience is as uncomfortable as possible, because I'm trying to, I suppose, get across the experience who might not be disabled or chronically ill, and trying to get across how uncomfortable these situations are for us. I can move it, I think. So as part of the installation and the peer support group, I created these kind of drawings and illustrations of my own time in hospital. So see the first one there, the doctor is saying, oh God, I can't even read it. Oh, and then I'm replying here. So I've been kind of looking at those interactions with medical professionals and how to make them better. And as part of the peer support group, participants were invited to write in their own kind of situations, write in their own things that doctors have said to them, and kind of play with them in a humorous way. So these drawings as well are part of the exhibition and installation. I can move on to the next slide then. So, and we looked at, as part of the group, was comfort in these kind of spaces and the kind of chairs and seating that is used. And if chronically ill, sick, or disabled people are in mind when designing these spaces. So we worked a lot on like the ideal type of chair, and kind of looking at all of the ridiculous ways that design tries to deter people from sitting for too long or from sitting in a certain position, especially in we moved on then to looking at like public spaces, sort of like kind of anti-homelessness barriers, and kind of seating that is designed so that you won't sit there for too long, or so that you won't be able to sleep there, and how these designs sort of negatively impact disabled people in public spaces, and how we're deterred from relaxing or resting, which then deters us from the house at all. So I can, next slide, I think. So again, looking at like public spaces and how we're being left out of those conversations. A huge thing of like in public transport design specifically is like these leaning bars. So they're designed so that you won't sit down for too long, so that you won't be too comfortable. And this has stopped like myself from going out for too long because I can't walk for very long. I need to rest, but these aren't places that you actually can rest. I think we can move to the last slide, unless this is. That might be the last slide. So yeah, sorry, I've kind of gone off on a tangent of seats, but yeah. So the exhibition is this kind of large scale installation. You enter, and then you either have a good experience, as in you're treated like you should be treated very well, and offer you, different kind of beverages. I ask you if there's any way I can help you. If any access needs that you have, we have kind of communicated about those before, and those have been accommodated. Experience of the exhibition. There's also the option for, this was previous to coronavirus, there was also the option for a meeting or phone call, and kind of we have interpreters and things like that to make the exhibition as accessible as possible for anyone who's disabled. If not, you're left waiting for a very long time. Your interaction with me is I suppose much more charged. So for the performance element of the show, everyone's kind of given a chart with like hypothetical illnesses, some of them like really farcical and just made up. And these are kind of modeled off of the way that med students are taught. So they have like kind of days with lots of actors who come in to play patients, and they're sort of like taught to be empathetic, and this is kind of a play on like whether or not this works. So for each version you get like a chart, and there are certain questions, and if I like say the buzzword, you're allowed to give me more information, and that way I find out what's wrong and I help you. And if I don't say the buzzword or whatever is highlighted on your, you're not allowed information, but you have the information. So the idea is kind of to look at like those specific one-on-one experiences that we have all the time, and not necessarily to blame like medical professionals, although sometimes I do, but to kind of look at them as a whole, and to look at kind of, is this model working? Who is getting to be a doctor? Who is getting to be, a surgeon? And how do we change kind of the entry points into this? How do we change who ends up being a doctor? And how do we give those people more information? And how do we prioritize care and conversation within those structures? And like, is any of it possible under a capitalist system? So like huge questions. But yeah, so at the minute we're looking to do an online experience, because unfortunately I can't get in to see the exhibition at the moment. I've been working with A4 Sounds, and they've been incredibly helpful in kind of rejigging the whole thing so that we can do something online, and we're hopefully looking at doing like a sort of a game or interactive thing that you can follow through online, maybe in December or January, and a exhibition on whenever possible. The gallery have been really, really supportive, and I'm lucky in that we're looking to have it, programmed again as part of either 2021 or 22. So I'll let you know. I suppose another huge part of the project is looking at access, and who kind of able to access the medical world, but like from my point of view, who's able to access the art world. Sort of now kind of become much more accessible. I'm able to interact with much more art and much more kind of engagements like this than I would be normally, because of kind of how things have gone online. And I would love to draw attention to, keeping that up once we move out of the online world again. It's really important for people who might be housebound, like for instance, and that we continue to prioritize access. And during this time when theatres and art centres are closed, I think that it's really important that we use this time, especially for funded organisations, to look at being able to access your space, both in terms of artists and in terms of audiences. Like for example, in theatre, I love working as a designer. I'm interested in lighting design, but for lighting design, I'm completely cut out of being able to work in those spaces because of the long working hours, and often even if a theatre itself is accessible, and like I use that term broadly, I don't just mean wheelchair accessible, which is often kind of what venues see as, like, if my venue is wheelchair accessible, then it's accessible, but we need to kind of look at it in a sense. So if a theatre is accessible to audiences, that doesn't mean that it's accessible to me as a designer to do lighting design or set design. We need to look more broadly during this time at like who is allowed to make art and who it's possible for to make art, and kind of especially for funded organisations and the Arts Council, at like how we change how many disabled people and people are cut out, and like whose voices are we not hearing, important voices to hear. So okay, access rant over. So the exhibition should be on next year, and there should be an online version on either at the end of this year or early next year, so keep an eye out. You can look on my website, which is just my name, anyaohara.com. That's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Anya. That's really, really thought-provoking and really powerful stuff. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Last but not least, we're going to hear from Dave Randall. Drawing on inspiration from the late sort of 1970s movement Rock Against Racism, and citing examples from his own career and work, Dave is going to discuss the role that music can play in the fight against racism and for a better world. Dave.
Thanks very much. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be speaking on this panel. Yes, I mean, in terms of my own work, I'll tell you what, I'd rather keep this short. So if anyone decides that they are interested in exploring some of the new music that I've released, I'll put a link in the chat. But because I'm excited to get to the discussion which follows this contribution, to keep this brief. But yes, I would briefly like to look back and hopefully to learn a few things that I hope will inform us as we look forward. I would like to share with you a few insights which I have gleaned, I suppose, while I was researching the book that I have written about music and politics. And I want to share those insights in the hope that we, all of us, consider whether it might be appropriate to adopt some of those approaches, whatever area of cultural work we happen to be involved with. The book is called Sound System, The Political Power of Music, and it looks at a number of examples of music and politics converging throughout history and across cultures. And yes, indeed, one of the examples that I look at is Rock Against Racism, which, for those of you who don't know, was a very effective music-led anti-racist campaign that reached its peak about 40 years ago, and I believe was very effective, really, in shifting the sort of sense of a whole generation on the question of racism. So I'd like to look at 4 things that I think Rock Against Racism really got right. I know that a lot has changed in the last 40 years, but I think that these are 4 general approaches that are worth remembering and considering. But before I talk about those 4 things, let me just set the scene with a quote from one of the founders of Rock Against Racism, a guy called David Widgery. He said this. He said that that their experience of that campaign taught us a golden political rule. He says, how people find their pleasure, entertainment, and celebration is also how they find their sexual identity, their political courage, and their strength to change. And I think that remains true. And therefore, I think that the things that we're talking about this afternoon, and indeed the things that we've talked about across the festival, across the weekend, the ways in which culture changes the world, I think that those things are fantastically important. Culture matters. And it's also important to recognise that culture is not automatically on the side of progress. On the contrary, in the mid-1970s, a number of Britain's leading pop stars were making quite outrageous racist comments or gestures, among them David Bowie, Rod Stewart, and worst of all, Eric Clapton. And indeed, as many of you will know, it was a drunken rant while on stage at the Birmingham Odeon by Eric Clapton that led to the foundation, the starting of Rock Against Racism. So culture matters, and it's politically contested. And I think the brilliant thing that the activists who brought Rock Against Racism together, the fantastic thing that they did was they recognized that we can win that contest. We can win culture back for progress. Now, as I say, I think there are 4 things that they did that were very, very effective. The first was that they were very creatively open. You know, there was nothing sort of dogmatic or staid about Rock Against Racism in the way that there can be with some political campaigns. This was very much a chaotic creative hub. And you really get a sense of that if you read accounts of the office in East London, or indeed see some film footage. If you haven't yet seen the film White Riot about Rock Against Racism, which has just come out, I would highly recommend it. So it was very creatively open. This was a group of people from diverse backgrounds who were willing to try things out. The second thing is that although it was led by the creatives, it was nonetheless very much connected with broader political movements and indeed political organisations. A number of the key Rock Against Racism activists were members of the Socialist Workers' Party at the time. 1 or 2 of them, like Peter Hain, were in the Labour Party. A year after Rock Against Racism began in 1976, the Socialist Workers' Party formed the Anti-Nazi League, which was very much a sister organisation of Rock Against Racism. And that in turn was connected to the trade unions. And indeed, it was very often rank and file trade unionists who provided the much needed security at those early Rock Against Racism gigs. So it was connected to a broader political struggle. The third thing was that Rock Against Racism was unafraid to go beyond liberal platitudes on the question of racism. And I think this is important. They didn't just say we shouldn't be racist because, you know, that's nasty to the victims of racism. No, they had an analysis which argued that racism is bad for all of us, that very often racism is deliberately manufactured in order to divide working class people so that they can more easily be exploited. And particularly within the pages of their fanzine, Temporary Hoarding, they talked about the links between racism and imperialism, the links between racism and big business, the mainstream media, and of course mainstream politicians at the time. They tried to analyse the roots of white supremacist ideas and all of these sorts of things. So I think that's fantastically important. They weren't to have a grown-up political discussion with people. And the fourth thing, and perhaps the most important thing, and the most relevant for our discussion this afternoon, is that they were very much focused on empowering the grassroots. So yes, there were big bands playing at big gigs. Famously, The Clash played at Victoria Park in East London, and Aswad and Elvis Costello at Brockwell Park in South London. And there were other big carnivals across the country. But Rock Against Racism always encouraged people to put their own gigs on. In fact, there's a wonderful anecdote that I think is told in the film White Riot, which goes like this: that somebody phoned in to the office in East London and said, I love what you're doing. I'd like to get involved. Do you have a group in Aberystwyth? And the person who picked up the phone in the office replied, you are Rock Against Racism Aberystwyth. In other words, really encouraging people to get involved, to be proactive, to participate. And I think that is fantastically important too. So on that last point, and as I say, I think that in a sense might be the most relevant for us at the moment. On that last point, let's be clear about where we're at in terms of the grassroots. The pandemic that we are experiencing at the moment may well lead to attempts to impose austerity and may well lead to some sort of a deep recession in the coming months. And therefore, I think it's very important that we campaign for the continued funding, or to defend existing funding for arts and music education. And we need to make sure that arts and music education is accessible to all. And I don't just mean formally accessible. You know, if there's a scheme running in a particular area and education is being offered for free, but it's only kids from wealthier families who are turning up to participate, then people need to look at that. And they need to think about how we can make it clear to less well-advantaged, to working class and poorer communities, that this is for them and that they are welcome. So we need to protect the funding of music education. Secondly, I think that once this pandemic has passed, we need to demand the funding of cultural events that can bring people together, that can give people an opportunity to get to know each other and celebrate one another. I think that is fantastically important in this increasingly polarized world. And finally, we need venues in which both of those other things can take place. So we need to defend public spaces, and we need to defend not only independent music venues, but the other sorts of buildings in which community arts takes place. I think that's fantastically important. And as you will all be aware, there's a real threat at the moment to those sorts of venues because of the economic, the devastating economic impact of COVID at the moment. You know, I think that one way to measure the health of a society is to ask, to what degree do ordinary people participate in creating culture rather than just passively consume it? So I think that is very important indeed. So just to sum up, the four themes that I think are worth us considering adopting are to be as creative as possible and to try things out, to get connected to broader political movements, including political organisations, to be unafraid to have a grown-up political discussion with people, to go beyond liberal platitudes, and finally, to make sure that our priority is to empower people at the grassroots in their communities. Thank you.
Super stuff, Dave. Thank you so much. You really hear the passion coming through, don't you? Fantastic. Guys, we've had an hour of inspiration and ideas and all sorts of things gelling around, things that have happened in the past, currently happening and happening in the future. So now we're going to throw the floor open to you for any questions to any of our speakers. So just put any questions that you've got into the chat, either on YouTube or on Facebook. Okay. Let's go back to Antonio and Laura. Just have sort of a question for you. In terms of kind of, I suppose, keeping the projects going during COVID, has there been anything positive or anything new ways of working for you guys has work been easier in any way for you during COVID? Has it given you a bit more space, or is there anything positive to pull out of the sort of the way that 2020 has been from your perspective? Lara?
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yes, no, I'm sure Antonio would agree with this, but we've actually found there's been a lot of really interesting communications. In fact, when we did the work in Christchurch, we recorded all the artists, they recorded themselves on phones, and we edited together audio onto our videos. And it's like that sort of really everyday technology that we were able to use. And we've had a lot of and because some of our artists live all over Ireland, so in fact there's people watching now today who live in Cork and Dundalk and other, because I live in Dublin, I suppose. So it's sort of like, in a way, you can see how the distance shrinks. I think that's one thing. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Antonio, is there anything you want to add to that?
Sorry, I was muted there. The exhibition there, Lara was talking about in Christchurch, that happened in June of this year. So just as we weren't in the depths of lockdown, but we had to readjust. That was supposed to be a physical exhibition that people could come and visit, but that was eventually then filmed and put onto a video as a walkthrough with artworks projected into the space that we filmed. So yeah, we've just found ways of doing things differently and making the best of the situations. I guess that's what we're all about, I guess, thinking laterally and finding new approaches, and hopefully through discussion today we might come up with some more.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Just while we're waiting for any more questions, and guys, do throw the questions up. You've got a great opportunity here with all of these amazing artists and organisations. Anya, perhaps we'll jump to you. You were talking about how access has improved in some ways for you during sort of COVID. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that? And I suppose going forward, what mainstream society needs to take on board in terms of things it can learn from the lockdown and the 2020 year in terms of improving access?
Yeah, I suppose on the one hand, it has improved in that, say you're not able to leave your house, meetings that often you would have been required to attend in person, that might have taken all of your energy, time and money to get to, it's become possible to have those online. It's become possible to have things like this online, where you can kind of phone in or video call in. I mean, in other ways, we've forgotten lots of people while we're moving online. I think lots of the things that we're lots of the things right now, I'm not sure, are there captions on YouTube or Facebook? I don't know. I haven't seen many sign language interpreters or anything like that. I think that we need to, while we're online, we also need to be aware of who we're leaving out. And I think that I think that when we sort of hopefully move, and we need to remember that things like this were possible, and kind of not make a big deal of like someone phoning in or someone ringing in from their house. But again, keeping that, just because like it's a video, I think that we need to kind of start like production meetings, start planning meetings with accessibility in mind, with disability in mind, with disabled people there at the table, because things are going to be forgotten and things are going to be left out if we're not there from the very beginning. So yeah, I suppose that's what I'll say.
Thanks, Anya. Okay, please tear away. Okay, so Frida's asking, how have you managed to fund your projects? Perhaps you could all just say a little bit about where the funding has come from.
Okay.
Maureen?
Start from our project. Yeah, start from Smashing Barriers. Smashing Barriers. Yeah, it has come from Create. Create have funded us quite a lot in our growing times, and so have DCC the community grants, and also DCC Arts. And also ourselves, every week, like when we meet up, we put €3 in the jar, to help us, so that's where our funding comes from.
Thanks, Maureen.
Okay.
Was that you, Kate?
I think back in 2012, I got a small bursary through Dance in the Arts Council that was the kind of heart of the project. It started off as Anti-Capitalism, the musical, if you can believe that. And then Galway Dance Days was able to give us a platform, I think in 2014, and a couple grand with which we produced that. And otherwise, it was all profit share all the way. So we agreed that 50% of what we made through revenue through the backlot shows would go to the cast and everyone, and then 50% would be reinvested into the musical. And that is where it's at. Right now, I have applied for a grant to record the soundtrack. I don't know if that's going to come through yet. I'm going to do it anyway, pay for it myself if I don't get the grant. And fingers crossed. I'm on Patreon as well, which is really helpful to me on a day-to-day basis. But that's me personally rather than the project.
Okay, thanks a million. Kate, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the right place to say it, but yeah, we've had a lot of support from Create and Dublin City Council. But I would say it's very provisional. We apply every year or every couple months to keep the project going. So it's that is something that is challenging about the model of funding that we have at the moment. So I just wanted to kind of flag that, not to give out to our wonderful supporters, but you do need multiple streams because it is always quite precarious. So I just wanted to flag that.
Thanks, Kate. Laura, do you want to say?
Yeah. So I've sort of been very involved in trying to do grant applications, so it's an ongoing struggle. We managed to fund up. We've only really been functioning this year, so we're very new, and we sort of took the risk and jumped in to do that first exhibition this year, and we actually used GoFundMe as a crowdsourcing fund, and that was good as a start off. But one of the big issues I'd like to say for a lot of artists involved with Art Nomads and people who potentially might be, is that for people who are here as maybe asylum seekers, or they may be refugees, or they may be precarious migrants, that there's so many barriers, and it's very hard. Like, we were initially trying to get funding to fund just the meeting, just for people to meet together, and we haven't been successful with that so far. But it's just like, I suppose, like with many other things, we talk about access. It's like, what are all those barriers to access? So yeah, it's ongoing work, basically.
Okay, thank you. get those questions in, guys. Dave, maybe can I ask you a question? You didn't sort of mention Black Lives Matter. Can you just tell us a little bit about, I suppose, perhaps some of the creative projects that have come through that movement, you know, in the context of those kind of four important areas you were talking about?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that perhaps the most significant takeaway from what Rock Against Racism achieved was that if you can have a broad political movement which, you know, persuades people that it's worth turning out on the streets on demonstrations or turning up to anti-racism, so on, if you reach a tipping point, then you can really start to change. Things. And in a sense, the biggest pop stars of the time will reflect that. They will either become discredited in the case of Eric Clapton in 1977. I mean, politically discredited. Obviously, he continued to have a prolific music career. But the grassroots movement that Rock Against Racism really prioritised is the key thing. Now, fast forward to 2016, which is when Black Lives Matter began. I think you can see exactly the same thing happening there. I mean, it was a handful of activists initially, and of course the families of the people who have been killed by the police or vigilantes. Sorry, I just heard a voice jump in there. And yes, and obviously that campaign grew and grew. The hashtag Black Lives Matter appeared after the murder of Trayvon Martin, and by about April 2016. So, you know, by mid-spring, it had reached such a kind of a critical mass that even the biggest pop stars in the US, I'm thinking of Beyonce, felt that they had to at least reference it, or at least they felt that the scale of the grassroots movement allowed them to articulate feelings that they'd had all along. And therefore you had artists like her becoming political in that slightly more controversial than, you know, I'm going to vote for Obama, and I thought that Martin Luther King was a good guy. In other words, as I said in my introduction, going beyond liberal platitudes and actually criticising the police. That was the first time that Beyonce had done that, and I think it was a direct result of Black Lives Matter. Now, there were other musicians at that time, like Killer Mike from Run the Jewels, who were very much involved with the grassroots movements from the beginning. Around the same time that Beyonce dropped the song Formation, he was campaigning for Bernie Sanders in the, as we now know, unsuccessful bid to head up the Democratic Party's presidential campaign in 2016. Now, you're seeing similar sorts of things happening now, except that gigs aren't taking place. I mean, you know, in the middle of this COVID crisis, sporting events are taking place without the audiences. And so we see some fantastic contributions and acts of solidarity coming from sports people. But in terms of music, it's more songs being released, and Beyonce has done this again, and lots of other artists have too. But I think that experience of talking to a huge crowd from the stage hasn't been possible in the same way that it has been at sports events. Of course, it has on social media. And I think that really what we're seeing is a movement of the grassroots being amplified by big pop stars and social media. I think there's lots of problems with social media, but the key point I'm trying to make is that Black Lives Matter is another good example of how important the streets are if we want to change the world.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, question in. Has engaging in issues changed your approach to the art you produce? So has engaging in issues changed your approach to the art you produce? Who would like to jump in there? Kate, as a non-disabled artist, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because in my practice, I've always done issue-based work. I would have back a long time ago even worked with Smashing Times in the cross borders projects, and I would have worked in inner cities, drugs projects, using theater. And it's really, every time I've started on a new project, I've kind of been thrown in with a community that I'm a total outsider to, and I'm very unfamiliar actually with quite a lot of the things that perhaps I don't know, a more careful person would research and plan. So whether it's going into kind of a youth project in Belfast, or if it's kind of working with families, in the Liberties around addiction issues, or indeed going in working with disabled people on projects, I think the idea of the artist as outsider is really important, and I think that's something I try to observe and see beyond what's kind of the normal for everyone else around me. But I think the biggest thing that's changed in my practice, I think, is just from the experiences of being an outsider and maybe not understanding some of the history or the culture around the groups that I'm working with. I found that having a co-facilitator from that community has been a huge, huge part of my practice, certainly over the last couple of years, with having Maureen McGovern to work with as an equal in the process. I'm the artist, but she's co-facilitating with me, and also mediating, the history and the culture and the expectations, and also maybe flagging my biases, and making me aware of kind of how I'm being perceived as the artist from the group. And that is, I think that's hugely important. And I would really, I would say, working with communities, particularly communities that don't have a strong voice in the arts, so whether it be migrant communities, asylum seekers, people of color, traveler, people from the traveling community, anything like that. I think it's really, really important as artists that we collaborate, and if possible, like co-facilitate with someone who is embedded in that community, just to I don't know, just to raise our awareness around what's going on, and to educate the artist about the community. So yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in there? Maureen, do you want to add anything to what Kate said there?
Thanks. Yeah, I do, because I mean, we had a philosophy going in there, and the philosophy, had to, the artists had to take that on. Now, it was very, very hard for a non-disabled artist coming into a situation where we're saying to them, listen, you have to work under social model disability. Jesus, like, I mean, what is that? The artist would have said, like, so, and it took Kate and I a year, easily a year, going, arguing what that means, like from her side, and what it means from my side, and then we came together, and it was about a year, Kate, wasn't it? So that we could work, well then. So Kate had to understand what that social model disability meant. That was really, really important, because we weren't working under any other philosophy, only that philosophy, and that was it. It was hard for Kate, God love her, but but it was good fun. It was good fun, and I think that brought around mutual respect for each other, and that was important, because like we worked with Deirdre as well, and we sat down with Deirdre and talked about like our philosophy and what it meant, and hopefully she understood that, and other non-disabled artists. I have to say though, what I found was, like, I was looking for disabled artists, to work with us. And we found that really difficult to find disabled artists. And I know that they're out there. Like, since I've started the projects in Smashing Barriers, like, I have come across disabled artists that we are contracting in different ways, like, in the Disability Action Collective. But that was really important, and that was very much hidden. Disabled artists were very much hidden, like, within the community of artists. And I found that really difficult and very frustrating. I'm glad to meet you on it today. I'll be on to. So it's really important that we work with disabled artists as well.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you. I think we have another question in from social media now. This is a question for Art Nomads. So Antonio and Lara, how far is the Arts Council? How far is the Arts Council supporting your projects regarding funding?
Do you want to answer that, Antonio?
Yeah, I don't. We've put in an application at the moment for funding through the Arts Council for a project to last the duration of maybe a year or so, which will involve all 10 of us that are participating at the moment in putting on an exhibition in Dublin and also in Cork. But during that year, over that year process, to involve all of us in documenting how we engage, how the group, as Laura mentioned before, we're quite a new group, only established this year. So we're still all getting to know each other and documenting that whole process of Art Nomads as a collective growing, sharing ideas, thoughts, hopefully being able to share meals together, music, other sort of cultural events. So yeah, we're waiting to see what the outcome of that is, hopefully within the next few weeks. And if we're successful, we're hoping that will be a great project for us for next year.
Best of luck with that. Deji, can we
Thank
just
you.
jump to you, because you said before, I'm going to do this project, and if I don't get funding for it, I'm just going to do it anyway. So can you just perhaps say a few words about the kind of, obviously there's a lot of downsides to that in terms of not having the funding, but can you just maybe say a little bit about the kind of the artistic and the creative freedom that you can get from kind of not being beholden or being restrained by a funder for a project?
To be honest with you, I don't think I've ever felt beholden or restrained by having funding.
Okay.
It's just the case.
That's good.
It's just a bit harder to get things done without it. No, honestly, it just takes a heck of a lot of willpower. Like I'm not rich, and I guess though, like it does turn back again though to community. Like at all the difficult moments of my life, it's been the people around me who have rushed in to fill the void. And so probably that relationship is a bit different from a relationship where there is funding. Actually, there's been tremendous bonds between the people. You're working together, not with profit as the motive, or not, and that is really, it brings it really close to the heart. And people do show up, and they do bring their passion, and they do bring their skill. And so I suppose that, that relationship is a bit different from what a funded relationship would be. I'm not opposed to funding, no, I'm not, but but yeah, there's a lot of love that comes through.
That's great. I wasn't suggesting funding was a bad thing, by the way. It was just that obviously sometimes it comes with certain parameters and some sort of restraints and often an admin burden as well, which I know isn't easy on groups. So, but thank you for that. I think we've got another question on social media. Okay, this is from Theatre Maker IE. How do you balance the issues you want to address and the quality of your art? Let's throw that one on you. Would you like to say something about that?
Oh God, I don't know. I suppose I like my priority in the work that I make is usually to kind of draw attention to something and kind of get across the issue. That is like the first thing that I'm trying to do. I do try to work to like a high standard, and kind of that comes from kind of bringing in lots of collaborators and getting support from galleries and stuff like that. But like to be, it is my second. It's second on my list of, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Dave, yeah.
I think this is an interesting discussion because it reminds me of a closely related but slightly separate discussion. I mean, I think it's important to say that the quality of the art has to be paramount. You know, you have to make good art first and foremost, but hopefully good art comes from being honest, and maybe it's being honest about unrequited love, but I think very often it's being honest about a particular social or political issue. In other words, I don't think the and message are counterposed in any way, shape or form. But here's the closely related discussion that your question reminds me of. There are a lot of people who say that pop musicians in particular shouldn't be political. And actually often I hear that said about African American musicians, you know, be it Kanye or whoever, you know, whatever their politics are. I think it's something that we need to question and actually push back against, because I think that very often it's a kind of the messages get back in the box. So of course there's an element of racism to this when African Americans being told not to be political. You know, your job is just to entertain us, and so I think that we need to really interrogate and push back against. But the bigger point here is that I don't think that those people who say that you shouldn't mix music and politics, in my example, or art and politics in general, I don't think they would say that to Beethoven. I mean, let's not forget that Beethoven's work, particularly the Third Symphony, was absolutely inspired by the revolutionary movements of the time. You know, I don't think those people would say it to Picasso about Guernica, one of his most acclaimed paintings, which was, of course, all about the Nazi bombing of that town in Spain in the 1930s. So, you know, for me, art and politics certainly don't have to mix, but they certainly can and very often do. So I think it's that if there are artists who are interested in mixing art and politics, then, you know, go for it. Do probably produce some very good art.
Amen to that. Yeah, that's great, Dave. Thank you. Point very well made. We're going to go on to, I think, the last question here before we wrap it up. And this is a question for everybody. We'll have a quick spin round, everybody, please. So what do you think is the role of the artist in society? And I'm going to take you in the order that you just appear on my screen. So Lara, you're first. What do you think the role of the artist in society is?
I think by imagining and being creative thinking is really key. And I think it's very key at the moment in this whole COVID situation, but it is in many ways, in the same way as Dave is talking about political, the personal is political, the art making can be political. So I think we have a range of very valuable skills to be part of society, and we need to be paid. I'm afraid.
Very important. Thank you, Lara. Anya.
I suppose like we have lots of room. I feel that we're like really important creating community and bringing people together, and kind of, you know, as teachers, and I feel like we have a unique perspective about political issues, to speak about personal issues. I just think that we're able to tell stories and kind of relay information in a really creative way, which brings people together in a way that happen, I suppose, without us.
Thanks, Sonia. Thank you. Dave, your take on the role of artists in society.
Yeah, I'm going to say that two things. The role of the artist in society is to share it around, to try to give confidence to other people so that they become artists too. So I think the less specialized and kind of rarefied the role is, the better. And the second thing is that I think that artists should, whenever possible, use their art to invigorate progressive movements and to try to find fresh and attractive ways of articulating the demands of those movements.
Great, thank you very much. Antonio.
Yes, for me, I guess, likewise, what other people are saying, the sharing and expressing of our own individual ideas, and then communicating them with each other, I guess, to bring about change, to inspire, and yeah, just to enliven our lives, I guess, for the better.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Deirdre.
I think I feel like when I see something when I see a really good piece of art, I tend to have a deeper reflection of myself, or I tend to, there's some new facet of me that has been explored, perhaps that wasn't explored when I walked in the door. So maybe like deepening self-reflection, deepening community reflection. And also, artists have this platform where I think we can kind of quickly create shifts of consciousness. Like we can quickly flip something on its head, and it can have tremendous ripple effects. And there's not that many platforms that have that kind of ability to inspire. So that, I guess.
Thanks, Deirdre. Maureen.
Well, I'm not an artist, and I'm happy not to be one. And I think what an artist brings into my world is their way of telling the same story as a lobbyist or somebody else. And I think it's the artist. The artist can bring skills to people, and kind of like there's a liberation in how an artist can actually explore topics. It can kind of question the individual about, say, their lives, and make them realize, not make them, I don't mean it that way, but kind of like creative way of bringing out and naming what it is that's keeping that disabled, I'd say disabled person, because that's who I work with, is disabled people, keeping them exploring the injustice that's happening, and the artist can do that in a way that maybe I can't when I'm kind of lobbying. Do you know what I mean? So an artist is really important. Just another way of saying something that somebody else would say.
Thank you, Maureen. That's great to have that perspective. Last but not least, Kate.
Well, what can I add to all those wonderful contributions? I would say, just to sum it up, I think the role of the artist is to gather stories, gather communities, gather imaginings, gathering experiences, and gather those into an interrogation of the world as we find it, and also to actually demonstrate or, explore the world as it could be.
Thank you, Kate, and a massive thank you to all of our speakers. We've just been thoroughly thought-provoked, if that's a real word, and there's just so much to take away from this in terms of the ideas and the inspiration, and just so many things percolating around, certainly in my grey matter. So thank you so much for being part of today's Looking Forward event. This is the penultimate event of the Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival. I'm just going to hand over now to Mary Moynihan. So Mary is the Artistic Director of Smashing Times International Centre for Arts and Equality. She's also a writer, a director, a theatre and a filmmaker. So over to you, Mary. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Bryony. I want to give a special thanks to all the panellists for today's event, to Antonio, Lara, Deirdre, Kate, Maureen, Anya and Dave, and a special thanks to Bryony. We have one final event today and a number of events that are still running online, so do please have a look. You'll get information at smashingtimes.ie. In terms of looking forward, Smashing Times is planning to continue the creative conversations that have begun from this year's festival. This was our first year to run an artist professional development programme, bringing together artists who want to use their art to promote human rights. And we're planning to continue that. So if you're an artist and want to get involved, do get in touch. We're also continuing the Arts and Human Rights Network, which is for a wider membership, bringing artists together with citizens, communities, anybody who's interested in the arts and human rights. So again, we welcome you to join us. We're hoping to continue a number of the creative conversations that have begun to set up creative platforms into the future. So keep an eye on the website for further information. Again, in terms of looking forward, Smashing Times has a number of events we're looking forward to presenting. So one of them is State of the Art. The nation state is both violator and protector of human rights, which is supported by the Arts Council, and also Forgotten Voices, stories of hope, courage and resilience from the Holocaust and World War II, which is supported by Your For Citizens. So we look forward to sharing those projects with you. I want to take this opportunity to very quickly thank a few people, all the artists, the speakers, the activists, the moderators who contributed to this year's festival, to our partners, Frontline Defenders, Amnesty International, Fighting Words, Irish Council for Civil Liberties, the National Women's Council of Ireland and Trócaire, and to all our creative partners. It's been an absolute privilege to work with you all. I want to take a few moments to thank from the bottom of my heart. I want to thank Frida, Niamh, Ciara, Elizabeth, Veronica, Edmund and Kevin, and everybody who behind the scenes has made this festival happen. You have been fantastic. And I want to take a moment to thank some of our supporters who were the Department of Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sports and Media, the HSE National Social Inclusion Office, Erasmus+, Community Foundation for Ireland and Europe for Citizens. And most of all, I want to thank our audiences. You are one half of the creative circle, because without our audiences, we cannot do what we do. And we are so grateful for having you join us, and we look forward to continuing these connections into the future. I'm just going to finish with a quote from the poet, writer and civil rights activist Maya Angelou, who said, "In diversity, there is beauty and there is strength." And increased diversity and equality in the arts can lead to increased diversity and equality in wider society, which creates a better and more compassionate world for all of us. So we really look forward to keeping in touch with you all as we continue to celebrate and promote and remember the arts for human rights. And we look forward to the work for the next year and seeing you all again. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mary.
I am. Yeah, I am actually. I wasn't sure whether to turn off or not.
Okay.
Thank you.
Really was. Yeah, thanks everybody. You're great on the questions, because you never know what's going to be thrown at you. So